Hey everybody, good morning. And yes, it is another rainy day. We've been getting just pounded by the wet lately. So everything is super lush, but we haven't had much sunshine for June. So once again, I'm under my porch. So thanks for joining me. I'm Rita Hickman, body-mind expert, shiatsu massage therapist, and I help women really who are struggling with narcissistic and toxic relationships really get their life back. You know, mentally, emotionally, physically. I come from a whole Asian medicine, body-mind perspective on how to get all of that physicality healthy in your head and in your heart and to the level of even the microbiome in your gut. So today we're talking about trauma and narcissism. So one of the things which is least understood about narcissism by the general population is how traumatizing it was, and it continues to be. You know, one of the biggest problems with having a narcissist in your life right now is that they probably remind you and trigger of narcissistic experiences that you had when you were younger. And when, in order to survive, in order to protect yourself, in order to stay safe, because you really were helpless as a kid. Your brain wasn't developed, you didn't have the resources, you had really no other place to go. So if you experienced narcissism when you were a kid, you were traumatized then. And then being in a narcissistic relationship as an adult, it takes you right back to that trauma when you were young. Which for most people, it was never even identified. You know, all that stuff you went through, all those times where you had to be the adult and put the mask on and take care of everybody and think about everybody's emotions first, and we're living in a constant state of fear and fight or flight and tiptoeing around. You know, all that stuff, that was trauma. That traumatized you, especially because you were a child, because you didn't know how to process through the information. You didn't have good resources. You were isolated, emotionally isolated, and nobody really cared. Because unfortunately, in the world that we live in, there aren't enough adults around who take an active interest in children and the trauma that they go through in their homes or with their family. There just aren't enough adults that are able to look past the surface. You know, in some ways, I tell people I was lucky because as a side effect of it, I ended up, you know, having sexual abuse outside of the home. And so I was always able to hang my hat on that, you know, to get therapy and psychotherapy and go deep into the healing work because, you know, I had a legitimized trauma. But a lot of women didn't. Their trauma wasn't legitimized. It wasn't accepted or acknowledged. And it was just, we were taught to think that's just the way that it is. That's what a good woman does, whether it was the Catholic Church or whether it was the family life or whether it was, you know, just life. You were taught that you don't matter, that your emotions don't matter, that what you want doesn't matter, and you're going to lose no matter what you do. And so don't even bother trying because you're helpless and hopeless, and the only out is to somehow figure out a way to be happy in the insanity anyways. And so then people ended up with chronic problems, fibromyalgia, mental health issues of their own, relationships which ended up being, you know, in domestic violence. All sorts of crazy things go on. So one of the first things you need to do is recognize that if you're in a narcissistic relationship, you're probably being re-traumatized. You know, you were traumatized when you were younger with this whole set of belief systems and ideas because of you really were helpless. You really were hopeless. And your body didn't know how to handle it, and so it internalized it and became small and invisible and blended in. Or maybe it triggered you into being in a place of constantly acting out or needing to fight back because you just had no tools. So if you're in a narcissistic relationship now, you know, it's usually because you were trained or taught to believe that you don't matter, that who you are and what you need and what you want doesn't matter to anybody else and that you're on your own. So it's time to recognize that you were damaged or hurt or wounded more than anybody else will ever acknowledge. And it's not logical and it's not rational. It's emotional and it's energetic. And it's how your body responds to your perception of the world, to how the only perception you could have as a child. And the world looks at the situation that you're in now and says, well, why don't they just leave? Why don't they just do this? Why don't they just do that? What's their problem? They're looking at it from their point of view, logical and rational point of view. And they're not realizing that the human body and the human being is an emotional. We have emotions, and then we try to explain it through intellectualizing or justifying or explaining, or we try to take it out of the real physical experience of being traumatized and put it into our head. Now, sometimes we do that because it protects us, because when we're under stress, our body tightens up, our blood vessels narrow, and we don't get good circulation. And when we don't get good circulation, what that means is that all those chemicals of adrenaline and pain and emptiness, they don't get circulated through your body. It's your body's way of controlling how you feel. And so another way of controlling how we feel is to just put our focus in our head, to just be in our thoughts. So a lot of other people were traumatized as well and didn't recognize it. And so in order to handle you telling them about your trauma, they go out of their heart and into their head because they can't handle remembering their own experiences of pain and suffering and helplessness and hopelessness. Because most of us, because of the culture we grew up in, that's just the way that it turned out. That's just the way those generations were for the most part. So I'm here to tell you, honor the fact that you were traumatized, and honor the fact that narcissists re-traumatize you now, and that people who have not experienced trauma or who have not processed through their trauma, gotten help for it and worked through it and gotten the love and support to realize a whole different reality exists than the one that we believe is there. Unless someone works through that, they're going to look at your trauma and minimize it because it won't be legitimate. It won't be important. It won't be big enough that they can say, wow, that was really hard. They won't believe you. So it's important when you're going through this healing process, when you're working on this stuff, that you don't put your vulnerability in front of people who are incapable of handling it. And that can be true of therapists and psychologists that you see too. A lot of people get into those healing professions and energy workers and stuff like that. You have to check them out first. You have to make sure that you are safe. You can't give them everything until have a gut feeling that you're going to be safe. And even then, give them a couple hoops. Give them some things to demonstrate that, yes, when times are tough, they will not attack you. They will not minimize and diminish you. You have to check that out first, because most people won't get it. They won't get what you're experiencing, and they will not recognize that this is an emotional and an energetic problem, and not necessarily a problem of not being logical enough, or not being rational enough, or not being intelligent enough, or doing everything wrong. They're going to try to put it in the box of rationality. And when it comes to human beings, we are not rational. We are primarily emotional. And then we use our rationality to explain why we feel the way that we feel. And those are those stories that you were brainwashed with. You feel this way because it's your fault. You feel this way because you have sinned. You feel this way because you're not smart enough. You feel this way because you don't deserve to feel good. You feel this way because other people can't be expected to be healthy and to control their emotions and are untrustworthy. These are all the messages that we put on how we feel. And that will not move you forward. That will keep you stuck. Only when you go to that core and realize, yes, you were traumatized. You weren't damaged, because nobody's damaged, but you were traumatized, and it needs to be worked through. It needs to be healed. It needs to be compassion. You need to have kindness for it and understanding. And that's where it starts, with that kindness and understanding for the fact of what you went through and what you're going through now and what gets triggered by all of it. Have some compassion for that, because it's only compassion and that love that will make changes in how you feel. It's only finding someone outside of yourself and then developing somebody inside of yourself that says, you know what? It's okay. You can do this. Take care of your needs. Get this, move in this direction. It only takes people who've been there and done that who can say, yes, I understand. And in order for you to heal this and manage this, you need to be compassionate for yourself. You need to make sure you do that self-care, because all of us who've gotten healthier, that's the core. That's the root. You change your thinking from helplessness to a thinking of, all right, what do I want to do to feel better? What do I want to do to help myself feel and be more balanced and live a happier life? And whether it's leaving the relationship, or whether it's speaking up for yourself, or whether it's going to regular spa days, whether it's seeing your therapist twice a week, you know. Okay, I have to finish up. This is part 2. I got a phone call in, and that can interrupt the live stream sometimes. So, point being, take care of yourself, love yourself. It's going to be okay. And yes, you deserve to feel good, and it's possible, and you will. Homework assignment, do something nice for yourself today. Recognize you were traumatized, you're still being re-traumatized, and you need to love yourself a little bit more, okay? So, I'll talk to you later.